Valentine's Day is all about love and romance, and that's great if you happen to be in a happy, stable relationship, but all this stuff is a poke in the eye and a hit to the heart if you're not in a relationship or have an unhappy one. Even loving couples sometimes feel the pressure of unrealistic expectations. So, what if there was a way to get beyond the glitz and all the gifts to something more meaningful? Well, there is, and to find it, we have to go back. Way back to the beginning. I'm talking about the 3rd century, to the time of a Roman clergyman named Valentinus. Now, if you grew up in the Catholic, Anglican, or Lutheran Church, you probably know something about him already. But his biography is a bit tricky. That's because the name Valentinus was a popular one meaning strong or worthy. Several stories have come down to us, and it could be that they're all about one man, or as many as 3, or it could be that everything we know about Valentinus is a composite of all those guys. In my view, it just doesn't matter, because the point is not so much to honor an individual, but to honor the faith of Valentinus. And by all accounts, that faith was as strong and worthy as the name implies. According to his official biography, Valentinus was born in central Italy. He became a clergyman and served Christians suffering under Roman persecution. But the empire was in serious decline by that point, especially the Roman army. Beset by enemies and plagued by low morale and desertions, the force was having trouble keeping its soldiers. So, according to some sources, Emperor Claudius Gothicus placed a ban on marriages, which he considered a distraction that divided the loyalties of his troops. Enter Valentinus. Not only did he minister to Christians, which was a crime, it's said that he secretly conducted marriages, which undermined the emperor's authority. One account says he gave couples heart-shaped pieces of parchment to remind them of their vows and God's love, beginning the widespread use of hearts on Valentine's Day. Eventually, the Christian was put under house arrest by a judge named Asterius. One legend says that while the two men were discussing Jesus, the judge brought Valentinus his blind adopted daughter and said he'd honor any request if God would heal her. Valentinus is said to have prayed and put his hands on the girl, whose sight was restored. In response, the judge broke up his idols, freed all the Christians in his jail, and was baptized, along with 44 adult members of his household. But Valentinus was arrested again sometime later for continuing to evangelize. Only this time, he was sent to the emperor himself, who was known as Claudius the Cruel. At first, the emperor took a liking to Valentinus, but when the Christian tried to convince him to embrace Jesus, Claudius commanded that Valentinus either renounce his faith or be beaten with clubs and beheaded. The devout man refused and was executed by this gate on February 14 in the year 269. He was quickly buried at a nearby cemetery, but his disciples retrieved his body a few nights later. Today, the skull of Valentinus is in a basilica in Rome. Other bones are in a church in Dublin, Ireland, which is a popular place of pilgrimage on Valentine's Day, especially for couples getting married. Though Valentinus is still considered a saint by the Roman Catholic Church, he got a bit of a demotion in 1969 when his feast day was dropped from the main calendar. But his unbending and courageous faith is commemorated on February 14th by several Christian traditions. By the way, some people used to think the early church latched on to Valentinus to counteract a pagan holiday called Lupercalia. It was celebrated in February to commemorate the she-wolf who supposedly raised the two founding brothers of Rome, Romulus and Remus. The fertility god Faunus, half man and half goat, also played a big part. Each year the feast began with the sacrifice of goats. Then women were gently hit with strips of goat hide dipped in blood. to make them more fertile. So it's easy to see why the church might want to get away from that, but most scholars now agree Lupercalia was not the reason Valentinus was given attention. Even so, the internet is filled with sites telling Christians to have nothing to do with Valentine's Day because of its supposedly pagan origins. Interestingly, they don't do the same thing with Christmas, even though we know that holiday was first emphasized by the church to take the focus away from pagan celebration of winter solstice. Look, I'm for anything that will steal the thunder from crass culture and turn it into something spiritual. The truth is, a lot of our modern customs surrounding Valentine's Day only started in the 1500s, when English author Geoffrey Chaucer first linked the holiday with romantic love. At that time, February was the month when most people believed birds paired up, which became a symbol of romantic love. The first Valentine, as we'd recognize it, was written by Charles, Duke of Orleans, to his wife back in France when he was imprisoned in the Tower of London. He called her, "My very gentle Valentine." Eventually, love notes became all the rage on Valentine's Day and were soon commercialized. But what you may not know is that by Victorian times, something called vinegar valentines were common. Usually sent anonymously, they slam someone's looks, personality, or beliefs. The first women pushing for the vote got vinegar valentines by the bagful. Round about the same time, English chocolate drink maker John Cadbury began using leftover cocoa butter to make the first commercial chocolates. For Valentine's Day, the company put them in a heart-shaped box which could be kept for mementos once the candies were gone. That blew the lid off everything. But it's worth noting that celebrating Valentine's Day can get you arrested in Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia, where Muslim officials equate the holiday with casual sex and alcohol, both of which are banned in those countries. In Indonesia, just selling gifts that day can get you publicly caned. And the holiday is not without controversy in Christian circles either. This year, Americans alone will spend $27.4 billion on Valentine's Day. One aid agency points out that's enough to feed 80 million hungry school kids around the globe for 6 years. Let that sink in. So what is the appropriate response for people of faith to Valentine's Day? You probably have to sort that out for yourself. But in my opinion, it's a wonderful opportunity to remind ourselves of some very important principles, beginning with a much deeper and broader appreciation for love. Not just romantic love, but love in its purest form. We need to remember that our faith today was only possible because countless Christians like Valentinus loved God and were willing to stand up and speak up instead of cowering and compromising their faith. The early church was powered by the blood of the martyrs, encouraged by the words of Jesus who said in Revelation, "Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life." Today, 1 in 9 Christians around the world continues to suffer persecution from government officials, other faiths, and even extremists within Christianity. We need to pray for them steadfastly. But we also have to take a good look at ourselves and see how lazy and complacent most of us have become. Our biggest danger is comfort. To put that in perspective, the average Canadian spends 24 hours a week just watching television, and it's 39 hours if you happen to be over 55, and none of that counts internet time. Compare that with the time you spend helping people, volunteering, or reading your Bible and praying. Even if you put those things together, it's nothing compared to the time we spend doing essentially nothing. The problem is, many of us are just like everybody else. We do the same things, we think the same way, and then we just add God to the mix when it's convenient. But the early Christians were different and distinctive. They risked everything to be faithful. They rejected the baubles of the world and kept their focus on eternity because they were made to choose. Nobody makes us choose, but we need to make the same decision and heed the words of James, who says, "If you want to be a friend of the world, you set yourself up against God." Scripture says God is passionate, that the Spirit He has placed within us should be faithful to Him, and He generously gives us the ability to do that if we're humble. So come close to God, and God will come close to you. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Peter kicks it up a notch when he says, "Prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Put all your hope in the gracious salvation that will come to you when Jesus Christ comes back. Live as God's obedient children and don't slip back into your old ways of living to satisfy your own desires." Another lesson from the life of Valentinus is the sanctity of marriage in the sight of God. For Christians, a union is more than just the love of two people. It's a daily living example of the love Jesus has for His church and a witness to what love should look like in a dark and broken world. Our marriages should be a testimony to selfless love, to yielding for the benefit of another, and to sacrifice that goes beyond convenience. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, Paul tells the married. And Hebrews 13 says, "Give honor to marriage and remain faithful to one another." The church is the bride of Christ, so important to Him that He gave His life for her. So just imagine how galling it must be when so many people want a relationship with Jesus but want nothing to do with the church He gave so much for. The third lesson from our story is that healing and the restoration of sight is still vital today, and it's our responsibility. Whether or not God used Valentinus to let the judge's daughter see again isn't the issue. The real issue is that our eyes have been opened to the love and mercy of God, and He expects us to share that revelation. In the New Testament, we're told that Jesus came to open the eyes of the spiritually blind, and He often makes a comparison between the physically blind and those who could or would not see the workings of God. He warns us against the blind leading the blind. In other words, we must never lead others astray by living in a hypocritical way. Instead, we're to lead others to the goodness of our Father, and He says we can only do that if we get rid of the plank in our own eyes before we try to remove the speck of sawdust from someone else's. In 2 Peter 1, we're told to add to our faith self-control, patient endurance, godliness, and love for everyone. The more you grow, the apostle says, the more useful you'll be. But those who fail to develop in this way are short-sighted or blind, forgetting they've been cleansed from their old sins.
As Jesus and His disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed Him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" He asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes.
And part of our eye-opening experience is the recognition that Jesus gave His life for the church, just as Valentinus gave his life for his faith, and just as we're to give our lives in sacrifice to God. So when you see all those red hearts this Valentine's Day, think about the heart of Jesus. May the roses remind you of the love he has for you and the thorns that pierced his head when he proved that love on the cross. And let's make sure our hearts are filled with conviction instead of mere confection, because what Jesus has for us really is an undying love. So let's go live like it.